There are lights on the moon. That's the first thing you notice. Not the craters, not the familiar curves, just the pattern, structured, geometric, deliberate. You blink, but they're still there. Grids of light, some flickering, some steady, as if someone left the city running while the rest of the universe slept. You walk outside, it's silent, summer air, faint smell of metal in the sky. The moon is huge tonight, too huge, like it's closer, like it's leaning in. And in that pale glow, you feel something strange rise in your chest. Not fear, not wonder, recognition. The girl across the rooftop drops her phone. She's barefoot, wrapped in a blanket, her face lit not by city lamps, but by something colder. She doesn't speak, she just stares up, eyes wide, as if she's watching someone watching back. And for the first time in your life, the moon doesn't feel empty. It feels occupied. It changes how children draw the sky. That's the first cultural shift no one expected. Not the politics, not the economics, but crayons, sketchbooks. Night scenes that used to end with a quiet moon and scattered stars now grow crowded with towers, bridges, glowing lines that cross the lunar plains like scars or signals. No one teaches this. It just happens, because the moon is no longer a symbol. It's a neighbor, and it's awake. The moment it became habitable, whether through terraforming, slow atmospheric accretion, or some forgotten twist of early solar physics, it became a question mark carved in orbit. And then, inevitably, a mirror. Because if something lives there, if structures bloom in the craters, if smoke trails stretch like calligraphy across the sea of tranquility, then Earth is no longer alone in the night. It's being watched. By what? Ourselves. Or something we might have been. Think about that. A planet-sized billboard, always visible. You couldn't ignore it if you tried. You'd see it while brushing your teeth, while scrolling through news about failing crops, heat waves, wars, and above it all, another world illuminated, possibly thriving, possibly better. That's the true tension. Not invasion, not aliens, comparison. It's proximity that wounds us. If it were Mars, fine. If it were Andromeda, fascinating. But the moon? That's domestic. That's humiliating. It's like sleeping in a car outside the house you used to own. Every night, you remember. The girl sees them first through an app, a high-resolution stream from some telescope array in Chile. At first, she thinks it's a bug in the feed. Then she sees the same shapes in archive data going back 2 years. She doesn't sleep that night. She draws them by hand, lines, hexagons, spirals across the craters. And by dawn, she no longer wonders if they're real. Only, why didn't we notice sooner? There are biological consequences too. Evolution stutters when the frame of reference changes. If you know that up there, humans, or post-humans, live under lower gravity, evolve faster, breathe thinner air, think in lighter bones and quieter thoughts, you begin to feel heavier, slower, less. Cultural envy becomes psychological gravity, and governments respond. Of course they do. New myths are written, old conspiracies reawaken. The moon becomes sacred, forbidden, colonized, denied, every version. Because we don't know whether it's a past we forgot, a future we missed, or a present we refuse to accept. But it's there, and when the clouds clear and the telescope aligns and she breathes out just once before zooming in, it's not the buildings that shake her, it's the lights in the windows. They flicker. Let's make this real. For the moon to be habitable, 3 things must change: atmosphere, magnetosphere, and gravity. The first is easiest to imagine. We've already simulated thin, oxygen-rich atmospheres on domed Mars colonies. With enough pressure, a breathable sky isn't science fiction. It's slow engineering. Gases can be imported, outgassing can be stimulated. Volcanic activity could in theory be induced. It would take centuries, but not eternity. The second, a magnetosphere, is trickier. Without it, solar wind strips atmospheres bare. Mercury knows this well. But models have proposed creating an artificial magnetic field using satellites, superconducting loops, or planetary-scale EM structures embedded beneath the surface. It's absurd, it's extravagant, but not impossible. And the third, gravity, is immutable. The moon's pull is only 1/6 that of Earth's. Life born there would stretch, float, adapt, hearts would beat slower, bones would grow thinner. Entire psychologies would bend towards stillness. Silence would dominate. Civilization would evolve not in resistance, but in surrender. What kind of mind evolves under lesser weight? Not a human one. Not exactly. Culture would follow physics. Architecture wouldn't resist collapse. It would dance with it. Towers like coral reefs, bridges suspended on tension, not compression, textiles that float, music that bends around silence like vapor around stone. Religion would center not on power or suffering, but on equilibrium. Weightlessness as sacrament. Communication would change too. No shouts, no drums. In low gravity and thin air, language might become optical, flash, gesture, color. Cities could pulse with shared meaning. Laughter might look like light. And then there's birth. Human biology assumes gravity. The moon would defy it. Infancy would be redefined. A baby suspended mid-air, learning to move through volume, not surface. A girl learning to walk in a world where nothing truly falls. What does that do to her sense of danger, of control? Maybe that's the real shift. We evolved with weight. Every story we tell, from Icarus to Prometheus, is about falling. Sin, failure, mortality, these are gravitational metaphors. Remove that, and you remove shame. She floats through a training pool back on Earth, preparing for a transition she still doesn't believe is possible. The room is quiet, only her breath, her heartbeat, her doubt. Around her, VR projectors simulate lunar architecture. She touches one of the light forms. It ripples. She doesn't smile, because in her bones she knows this is not a dream of the future. It's an archaeology of the present we never noticed. One more fact. If the moon had been habitable from the start, it would have captured Earth's early civilizations. The first gods wouldn't live on Olympus. They'd live above, in plain sight. The myths of every culture would be rewritten. There would be no heaven, only the moon. And no one would need to imagine gods. They would see them, every night. Now imagine this. The moon has been inhabited all along. Not by aliens, not by some ancient lost species, but by us, a divergent line, a sibling civilization seeded during some forgotten epoch. Maybe through technologies we buried, maybe by survivors of a collapse we chose to erase. Or maybe, as unthinkable as it sounds, the moon came first, and Earth was the fallback. It's a reversal so profound it burns the edges of history. What if we didn't ascend from the oceans, but descended from the sky? What if those lunar ruins we once dismissed were never ruins at all, but settlements in stasis, waiting? The girl's hand hovers over a photograph. It's not from a telescope, it's from the Apollo 17 archive. But someone's enhanced it. Exposure corrected, shadows lifted. In the upper left corner, partially buried in shadow, is a structure. Symmetrical, angular, not natural, and it's not new, because the dust is on top of it. We've looked at it for decades, and we missed it or refused to see. Here's the paradox. If the moon was habitable and inhabited, why didn't they come? Why didn't they signal? Rescue us? Warn us? Maybe they did. Maybe we weren't listening. Or maybe they knew not to. Maybe they left for a reason. There's a hypothesis, fringe, dangerous, quietly elegant, that life on Earth was not plan A, that it was exile, containment, that something went wrong up there, and the only way to continue was to start over, here. Deeper gravity, denser sky, a world designed not for possibility but for restraint. And then we grew, rebuilt, forgot. But the moon, it remembers. If this were true, if the moon was our origin, not our opposite, everything would bend. Religion, identity, responsibility. Colonizing the moon would become homecoming, and we'd realize we're not explorers, we're returners. But here's the twist that haunts. What if the moon didn't forget us? What if, all this time it's been watching, not waiting, not sleeping, just evaluating? Because there's something else. The cities aren't expanding, the lights aren't moving. Every year we scan them, same pattern, same glow. They're alive, but static, like a test that hasn't been graded, or a mirror that won't shatter. She walks into the observatory alone. Late night, no one notices. She loads the last month's data, cross-references past alignments, isolates the spectrum anomalies, then overlays the lunar lights onto Earth's night map. They match, not the shapes, the rhythms. Cities on Earth blink in sympathy with cities on the moon, not precisely, not mechanically, but emotionally, like breath matching breath across glass. And she whispers, not to anyone, just into the cold air, they're not waiting for us, they're deciding. The strangest part isn't the cities, it's the silence. A habitable moon should be louder by now. Signals, data, commerce, conflict. But what we see instead is a stillness so vast it feels designed. Structures remain lit, patterns persist, but nothing moves, nothing expands. It's like watching a stage set from across space. Perfectly arranged, eternally frozen, waiting for a scene that never begins. And that, more than anything else, begins to haunt her. Because it doesn't feel abandoned, it feels paused. We tend to think of life as noise, motion, growth, chaos. But what if the highest form of civilization isn't expansion, but withdrawal? Not conquest, but control. The moon may not be failing, it may be finished, complete, not in ruins, but in equilibrium. And we're the ones still unraveling. She begins to study them not as cities, but as symbols. Their geometry, their spacing, the way light fades near the terminator line like a heartbeat receding. She overlays them with ancient mandalas, with harmonic maps, with brainwave charts from meditation states, and it starts to align, uncomfortably. What if these cities aren't designed for living? What if they're designed for thinking? We measure intelligence by tools, by speech, by disruption. But maybe there's another metric: stillness. Maybe the moon's inhabitants reached a state where movement ceased to serve a purpose, where evolution no longer meant change but containment, a civilization that learned how to remain itself forever. Not gods, not machines, just minds. And in that stillness, a darker realization unfolds. If they're still there, just thinking, then we may be the noise, the variable, the storm they've been watching from above, hoping it would pass. But we didn't pass. We built rockets. We built signals. We built ourselves into something they might consider a threat, not because we're stronger, but because we never stop. Because we expand without asking why. That's the wound, isn't it? We don't know how to stop. And maybe that's what the moon was always trying to teach us. A civilization without expansion, without war, without even movement. Just presence, reflection, like a mind that no longer needs language to feel complete. She walks under simulated lunar light, inside a research dome designed to train astronauts in circadian rhythm recalibration. But her mission isn't launch, it's listening. 1 hour, then 2, then 12. And in that silence, she begins to hear something stranger than any signal. She hears herself. The question is no longer whether the moon is habitable. The question is whether we are. What happens when the sky becomes a standard? For centuries, the moon was canvas, blank, poetic, safe. We projected our loneliness onto it, our myths, our rhythms. It was passive, beautiful, distant enough to absorb meaning without giving any back. But now it reflects, now it responds, now it stares, and that reverses everything. She opens a browser tab, a comment thread, a forum post with 2 million views. The topic? Why doesn't anyone look up anymore? And the answer, scrawled in a reply from some anonymous user with no profile photo, no past posts, because it looks back. The moon's presence no longer calms, it judges. Every night it reminds us there's a version of reality in orbit that did not collapse, did not burn, did not need 6 mass extinctions to get it right. Maybe. We don't even know if they're better. But they're there. And that's enough to destabilize the story we tell ourselves about who we are. Because humans don't fear being alone, we fear being outgrown. It leaks into everything: economics, ethics, fashion. Teenagers wear reflective circles on their backs, call it lunar skin. Cults form promising reconnection with the architects. Global movements begin, some wanting contact, others demanding silence. Some believe we came from them, others believe they came from us. The only consensus is disquiet. It spreads into dreams, nightmares mostly. A recurring one: she tells no one. She's floating just above the lunar surface. It's dark, quiet, and then in the distance, windows begin to light up, one by one, in rhythm, in sequence, as if answering her breath. What makes it unbearable isn't fear, it's recognition. The worst kind of mirror isn't one that distorts, it's one that shows you exactly what you are and what you could have been. Imagine growing up under that. A civilization raised with not just another planet in the textbooks, but another benchmark. You wouldn't just learn physics and history, you'd learn humility. You'd feel it in your bones every time you looked up at night and saw a skyline where there should be none. You'd wonder if your own future had already happened, just not here. We talk about progress like it's a mountain we climb, but what if it's a spiral? What if we're circling something we forgot? She walks along a seawall in low light. The tide is pulled back. Reflections stretch thin over wet concrete. Behind her, city lights. Above her, another city, on the moon. The same glow, but distant and quiet and undeserved. That's the final blow. Not that they're better, but that we are still becoming, and they may be done. It ends with a question. Not one you speak, not one you write, just the kind that settles into the back of the mind like dust into a sealed room, quiet, invasive, permanent. Because once you accept that the moon is habitable, you can't go back to seeing it as a rock. You start seeing it as a timeline, and the more you look at it, the more you start asking the only question that matters: were we supposed to be there? She stands in a launch room that isn't active anymore. The missions were suspended. Too many unknowns, too many cultural variables, too much public attention. But the suits still hang on their racks. The air still smells of ozone and sterilized metal. She walks past the console banks like a ghost in a cathedral, each light off, but each screen still humming faintly, like memory refusing to sleep. Behind her, the moon hangs in the window. Same position, same face, but no longer the same object, because now we know there's structure. Light, design, possibility, and more than that, restraint. The moon could have reached out, but it didn't. It stayed silent, deliberate, observant. And that's the most human thing of all, because maybe they are us, not in the genetic sense, in the evolutionary one, a timeline where we mastered patience instead of power, stillness instead of speed, a civilization that didn't rush to conquer but chose instead to endure, to watch. That's what keeps her awake at night. Not the fear of invasion, not the fantasy of contact, but the unbearable idea that someone already solved the equation of civilization and chose not to speak, that they're giving us time, that they're giving us distance, that they're giving us a choice. And the choice is this: do we keep growing louder or do we start listening? She walks to the observation deck, barefoot, nothing in her hands, no instruments, no data, just skin, breath, silence. She looks up, and this time, she doesn't look at the moon. She waits for it to look back. What if the moon isn't waiting for us? What if it's wondering whether we're worth remembering?